I am back with another Tempo Talk today, and I would love for our guests to introduce themselves to all of you.
Of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Cheeyang Ng. I use they, them pronouns. I grew up in Singapore, lived in New York for 11 years, and I'm currently living in LA.
Wow. What I have to ask first, then, because it sounds like you spent a long time in New York, what I guess was your experience working and living in New York? Did you enjoy it, or what I guess propelled the move?
I love New York City, to be honest. Like I always think of myself as a New Yorker at heart. And I feel like the move wasn't me saying goodbye to New York. It's more about expanding my journey in writing and my life experiences. And yeah, when I left New York, it didn't feel like, I didn't throw a party and, say goodbye. It just felt like, okay, I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll see you soon. So yeah, I've lived in New York for a long time and I was craving some change. I was craving some sunlight. And so here we are in LA. Yeah.
What I guess then, because you mentioned sunlight, are you somebody who, when you're writing, your process takes you more introspective, like spend time in a room by yourself, or do you like to find inspiration from watching or reading things, or do you like to go out into nature, or a mix of the?
That's a really good question. I know for myself, I'm a big homebody. So like I love being at home. My home needs to be comfortable. I need to feel happy in the space. When I write, it's very much like lock myself up in the room for 8 hours and just keep going. However, I think lived experience for me is pretty important. So like, I've traveled a lot, even when I was living in New York. Before I was writing, I was touring and as an actor. And I think lived experiences is where the interactions of meeting new people and getting to know new people and getting to know yourself a little bit more from living a life, that is my external self. But when it comes to writing, I'm always like, back home, stay at home, focus, turn everything off. And so, yeah.
That makes a ton of sense, honestly, because again, people take in sensory information in different ways, and experiential is one that we don't always necessarily draw attention to, but it's very much, especially when writing original material, something that is very valuable. Um, you may not know much about Tempo other than that we're very new on the block, but basically why we exist is because there are already resources out there talking about gender in the context of music and music professionals in theater.
Mhm.
Um, However, there are some people that are not included in that current umbrella that exists, and we are sort of navigating that and filling through a bridge. Um, would you be comfortable or willing to talk about your experiences with, being a non-binary person in spaces of musical theater and creating?
Yeah, for sure. I think gender is something that I have always struggled with. It's something that I didn't have the language or the understanding around who I am as a person for the longest time. And I think theater, especially writing for theater, living in the theater space, allowed me to express myself in a way that I never thought that it would have been possible. Just remembered when I was growing up, um my mom would always say like, hey, walk like a man. And I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? I'm walking and I'm walking like myself, but like, what is your expectation of gender and what are you placing on me? And I'm not saying this to, diss my mom or anything. I think they grew up in a time where the gender was binary. And I never ever felt, and for the longest time, I think, like I said, I didn't have the language or the understanding about gender to say that, like, I never felt like I was, a man, and I never felt like I was a woman. And it's kind of funny because there was this meme going around or something. It's like, I'm not gender neutral. I'm gender evil or something like that. Like some kind of I just don't subscribe to the idea that life, you know, is binary. Like being in theater allowed me to be like, hey, I don't have to be, you know, defined by labels that society wants to label me as. And for me, it's like finding what that expression is and finding what I'm comfortable with. Took a long time. It took a long time. I think when the first gender conversation came up, I would say closer to like 2018, like the more visible gender conversation happened. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that I could be someone other than a man. Because I never ever felt comfortable being like, like I never felt comfortable when people said that. And I was just took a very long time for me to say that, hey, I don't have to subscribe to the things that society wanted me to be. And that goes all the way back to how my mom would have said, you know, walk like a man, like that idea. And I think theater gave me the avenue to just be, you know, no one really judged you for who you are. No one, people value you for your lived experience, you know, going back to the idea of experiences and meeting new people. And people value you for being different, for being yourself. And it's not saying that I need to be a certain way in order to stand out. I can just be, you know, whatever way, shape, or form that means. And it takes a long time because I don't like to quote this, but what RuPaul says is true. You know, you really have to love yourself. You really have to come to terms with who you are, and you have to be comfortable with that before you can say, hey, world, this is who I am, you know? So as a non-binary person, I think it's less about whether I'm a man or, you know, it's that I just don't subscribe to any of those things. And I just think that I am myself and I am living in the world the way that I am. So yeah.
What I take away from that and reflect on is about how, you know, theater, the art form, is sort of, it belongs to everyone and it gives everyone a voice, but theater, the business, and theater, the structure, and theater, the institution, historically, has sort of pushed people into boxes as an extension of society.
Mm,
And you know, those barriers of identity, including gender, kind of have been reinforced over time, but we are living in a time where we are able to say you do what you do and it doesn't really matter necessarily
yeah,
what gender the person is because they have something to bring to the table. Like that's, I
100%.
think, what
I
we're
mean,
moving towards.
something that you just said that like the in theater, the institution pushes us to the boxes. It just makes me think about, you know, the whole conversation around featured actor, featured actress, or, you know, leading actor, leading actress, and all the award categories.
Mm.
And certain awards striking that away, and Tony Awards are still, you know, maintaining it. And I understand why it happened in the first place, because you wanted to give, you know, the different gender, the two genders that historically have been, you know, identified as what it was, a space to fight for themselves, right? To be represented. But also, like, I think we're in a time where people understand that gender is a spectrum. There's no one way to define yourself. And I'm not saying that man and woman don't exist, but I'm saying that those are not the only two things that can exist, you know? And yeah, it's time like theater caught up to the conversations that we've been having in the past couple of years, especially at the forefront, and take the lead, right? Take the lead to change how institutionally it has been. So,
I also, you know, in terms of like, yes, the actor categories are separate. However, for years, because of whose work is getting done, I mean, this year there were a record number of, in the past couple years, there's been a record number of trans and non-binary performers that were eligible and could have had their own category this year because that's how many there were.
mhm,
When you look at the non-acting categories like direction and writers,
yes,
you can't really talk about any gender except for cis men for
very
like
much so, yes.
a very long time.
Yes, I
I'm
mean, it's
laughing
happening
because
right
it's
now.
sad, not because it's funny.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, I think another thing that I would love to hear about is sort of your experience with music and theater, both in New York and in Singapore, if you wanted to share.
Sure. It's just my background in how I came about as a writer, or like like how I came into music. Is that the question?
That and also, your influence musically sort of too would be great.
Yeah. So I grew up in Singapore where I was born and raised. For a large part of my life, I came to the US for college after I completed my national service. I did go to the army, which was like another experience that we probably shouldn't talk about, but it was very traumatic. Uh, and but the interesting thing was like coming to the US, I went from being a majority to a minority. And the only different part of myself when I was back in Singapore felt like, oh, I was queer and I didn't know how to express that. And coming to the US, the queerness became something that was embraced by my peers. Less so in the society, but because I went to music school. So it didn't feel like it was like completely out of the norm, right? And for my music influences, I grew up listening to Mandarin pop music. I watched Bollywood films. I watched a wide variety of Asian music, so Canto pop, Mando pop, Indian classical, many different types of music. And coming to the US, that aspect of me kind of shed because I had to come into, I went to Berklee, and I had to be acquainted with jazz and the history of jazz, and also like the history of Western pop music and stuff like that. And I think right now, very much so in my writing, it's an amalgamation of both things, because it's like revisiting a lot of the stuff that I loved as a child, and putting it together with the things I love about Western music. And so that would be like, my writing style, because that's what I know. So yeah.
That all makes a ton of sense that you would then find ways, I guess. I think about this a lot with my personal experience, which I'm not going to harp on too much, but the idea of de-assimilation, um, which sort of, going back and forth between being in a bubble of majority versus minority, but also like it is true when you go to a certain hegemony, you kind of get exposed to all this new stuff, and this was my experience, at least. I'm not going to speak for you, but you question what can stay and what can go. But then, as grown up people out in the world, we kind of get to make that choice for ourselves a little bit more.
Yes, I actually think it comes down to like knowing yourself, and that takes time. It takes energy, like it takes daily energy to be like, this is what I care about. I didn't sing, so like when I started and grew up in Singapore, I sang a lot of Mando pop music. And once I came to the US, that part of me, I was like, no one understands that, no one cares about that, why, that's not important. So I just kind of put that away. And years later, I was like listening to a lot of the new stuff that was in the Mando pop scene, and also revisiting some of the old stuff that I loved. And I realized like, no, I love this shit. Like, why am I not, exploring what this is? And so I went back and sang it a little bit, and I feel like the integration of the two makes it a lot more interesting, because first of all, nobody has that sound here. Like, I'm not trying to write Mando pop for a Western audience. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to say, hey, there is a world where we can all live together. And I feel like the medium that I found myself expressing this through is through the medium of storytelling, because I think with theater, the element of storytelling is so strong that like, it doesn't matter what influences the music comes from, as long as it serves the story. Like, that's what's important. And so I kind of fell in love with that, and that kind of like translated through my work, which is now to like think about it and also to articulate it, it kind of feels wild, but that is what it is.
No, but I think that's beautiful to find, not having to make it be, as you said, you're not trying to push it into something that is Eurocentric or Western. You are just presenting it as you see it, and you're using a medium that theoretically storytelling belongs to everyone. Therefore, just because
Yeah.
musical theater has had a very narrow box, I'm seeing more and more that there are people who are bringing their whole selves to it and not being forced. Not gonna mention certain other programs that you didn't attend, but like there's been a lot of formulaic structures that kind of uphold one narrative,
Hmm.
intentionally or unintentionally, but even the idea of content dictates form. By forcing one form on everyone, it sort of has robbed us of generations of people's stories. So I'm really excited to see that people are finding their way to the medium. So thank you.
Of course. I think it's a conversation around I mean, what you just mentioned is it's a conversation with multitudes because yes, I think there has been a lot of information from the past. And musical theaters, I wouldn't say it's like a old art form. It's not a new art form. It's medium, right? It's a couple hundred, well, not even a couple hundred years. It's slightly under 100 years, and there has been how it was done before. And I'm not saying that that has to be the way it has to be now, but understanding how it was done before could be also very helpful. But I think the most helpful thing is understanding story. It's understanding how humans relate to story, and also figuring out how to break them in ways that are effective. I think understanding what came before, and the reason why we study history, the reason why we study, all these other things that came before us, is because you understand what people have done that have been effective to a certain audience, to a certain group of people, and how you and your story and your narrative could be successful in translating what your intention is going forward. I think a lot about story because I think about movies like Parasite, right? Like, I mean, for people who haven't seen it, you really should go see it. But like when Act Two begins, when the basement opens up, I just remembered my reaction was just like my jaw dropped to the floor because it was nothing that I expected. It was completely surprising, but it still clung on to the whole, like the tent poles of story, which is action and conflict, right? Like, and forward momentum. I just thought that was kind of brilliant. And I think in musical theater, in a storytelling medium, a lot of people I know, my peers included, myself included, we are pushing the art form, but also we're gonna fail sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, allow yourself to fail.
That is great advice. And in no way did I mean that there's still value in history 100%. I was more thinking of that there are some institutions that prescribe that we stick within a very small framework as opposed to, like you said, taking risks and opening up storytelling within still the medium of musical theater, but like not necessarily having everything be AABA, like little boxes
Of
all the
course.
time, every 2 seconds. It's really two questions. One is, was there anything else that you wanted to share with our community? And the other was, does that include talking about any of your specific shows? So those were
Sure,
the
sure,
questions.
sure. So I'll share a little bit about, for people who don't know my work and are interested in finding out about my work. I am primarily a musical theater writer that's venturing into TV writing. And in my musical theater space, the two more prominent pieces that I'm working on that are ready for production are Eastbound, that I've been working on with Kyan Hersey since 2015, and Maya, that I've been working on with Eric Sorrell since the end of 2018. So it's about a 5-year journey, and the other one's it's 8 years, coming to 8 years now. And I understand musical theater takes a long time. If you're interested in hearing any of the songs from the projects and what the stories are, you can find them on my website. They're at cheeyang.com. And other projects that I'm really interested in working on are within the TV space, I'm very interested in writing for genre, fantasy, sci-fi, like things that I am not usually writing in the theater space. But all my stories, any story that I put out, are usually at an intersection of queer, Asian, and immigrant stories. So it's either two of the three or three of the three usually. And they're pretty hyper specific, but it's always revolving around a central question that I don't have an answer for. So that goes for all my projects across the board, including my new projects that are coming up that I can't really talk about yet. But that's kind of like what I love. I love to explore things that I have questions about. I spend days, months, years thinking about them. And if you're interested in coming on that journey and exploring those questions with me, then my work might be an avenue for you to do that. A lot of my stuff, like I said, lives at the intersection of music that has Western influences and Eastern influences, and that shapes a lot of my writing. That doesn't mean that I can't write in jazz. I can't write, I can write in almost any genre that I've studied in, but the ones that I'm very much passionate about are at the crossroads of the two. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the big picture of what I do. And yeah, do you have any specific questions with regards to those projects?
I do have a specific question about one thing that you said that really jumped out to me about what you are passionate about, both in genre for TV and genre for music, and what you can do versus what you're passionate about. Because I know some people will talk about writing one for, because they need to write versus one that means a lot to them. Do you find that you happen to have carved out for yourself a lot of passion projects?
That is such an interesting question. I would say like every single project of mine right now is a passion project because they all don't pay me. No, not really. That's not true. That's just candid. But I think life is very short, and I feel like I am faced with my mortality very often, actually, but not in a way that scares me, but more in a way that like encourages me that like the time that I spend on something, especially my art. I'm very lucky to have right now to have a day job that pays basically all my bills. I work a regular job that is also flexible enough for me to be writing, and they understand that I'm a writer. And so I'm very thankful for that. So I don't have to like write for money on projects that I don't want to. So every project that I do take on at this moment are very much projects that I do care about. However, I also remember Jason Robert Brown said, I might be misquoting him, but he also says like some projects are, like money projects, and some projects are projects that I really, really care about. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in like what you need to do in order to survive either. And I think whatever puts you as a writer, as a creative person, as a creator in the best headspace and best position for you to create the best work, the ones that you do care about, you just got to do it, right? Like whatever that means. And for me, I've just been very lucky that all of the work that I spend time writing are things that I really, really genuinely care about. I have received even commissions. When people commission us, I will not write something that I don't care about. So if it's a song, if it's a 10-minute musical, if it's a 20-minute musical, if I'm putting time and energy into this, I care about it. Have I failed? Yes. Have I been unsuccessful? Yes. However, I would say every failure and every, hurdle has been a learning point. And that goes for all kinds of writing across the board. Whether it's prose, opinion pieces, whether it's, music pieces, like it across the board. I think everything that I've had an opportunity to express myself in has been truthful and has been meaningful to me. So, yeah.
I think that is such a good place to end for today, but also such a good message that the things you do have meaning, whether or not they work out the first time or the second time, but just finding ways to make meaning out of what you do. Like, that's such a great thing to say. So thank you for coming to
Of
talk to me
course, of
today.
course.